Well, good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for your time this morning. We appreciate it very much. We've assembled a team here today. We'll have them introduce themselves first, and then we'll jump into our presentation. So we'll start over here with Beth.
I'm Beth Wigman. I'm the Assistant Director of Human Resources.
Jill Manette, Director of Human Resources.
Brenda Derrick, Assistant City Administrator.
Susan Thompson, Finance Director.
Jamie Bullock, Assistant Finance Director.
John Strand, City Commission.
Dave Epcorn, City Commission.
Denise Kolpak, City Commission.
Arlette Preston, City Commission.
Well, thank you so much, Commissioners, again for your time today. And I just really appreciate our staff, too, being present here today. We've really invested a lot of time in 2023 and early 2024, really thinking about the future, thinking about improvements to our processes so that we provide the financial information that the Commission really desires to satisfy the needs of today, as well as helping us plan for the horizon line, plan for the future, plan for where we need to be in the out years. We've talked a lot in the last year about developing strategy that's aligning these strategic priorities, goals, and objectives of the Commission to some of our long-range revenues and expenditures. And the one thing I keep coming back to and I think about a lot is that these budgets don't exist in isolation. And we talk a lot about the annual budget process, but that process simply acknowledges that we're adding another chapter to this long, long book of installments of budget information. And so what we need to do is really step back and kind of think about where we want to be, not just next year in 2025, not just in 2026, but beyond that as well in 27 and beyond. And so we're going to be talking a lot this year about a strategic financial plan and one that will allow us to really plan that horizon line, as I mentioned earlier. I just want to acknowledge our finance and HR team assembled here today. Really appreciate all of their time, their valuable work in providing a roadmap for the future. I really support this work. I think this is one that can really drive the organization to some more substantive change in this space and help us plan for the future. So I've always said nothing changes if nothing changes, and to do different, we got to be different. And these are going to be some different inputs and some different, I think, perspectives on budget that will allow us to really move forward succinctly in the future. So today is going to be about providing an update on compensation. Jill Manette and her team have already delved into this topic pretty extensively. But just know that as we think to the future with how we structure these quarterly meetings, we want to make sure that these are timely, relevant topics that are really are satisfying the needs of the commissioners today, and then making sure that we're also keeping you thinking ahead of those other big picture topics that will be impacting future budgets, whether it's our reserve policies, whether it be our debt, our bond rating, our compensation, as I mentioned earlier, our CIP for engineering, capital assets, facility planning, a whole variety of topics that we intend to cover in these quarterly meetings. And so if you think about this meeting happening, we want to try think about that quarterly, but probably in the middle of the quarter. We think that that will provide enough opportunity and time for our staff to assemble information for the Commission and get this long-range financial plan off the ground. So we look forward to getting this going. This is our first meeting today, and I look forward to a future quarterly meeting that will be about an hour and a half to 2 hours in length. So this is our kickoff meeting today, and with that, we'll start first with Susan. Susan's just got a few updates and reports. Susan's going to have a variety of standing items that will come back to this group in the future, and then we'll get to our topic of the day, which is compensation. Thank you.
Hello. So the first two items I have listed basically as placeholders, since we've already talked through those. I would intend that we would talk about the quarterly financial review. Get a little closer? Okay, thank you. I would intend that we would talk about the quarterly financial review and address any questions. We did talk about that at the Commission meeting last week, so I won't be getting into that in detail. Same with the economic indicators, sales tax receipts. We will be presenting those on a quarterly basis, and Steve Sprague presented those at the Finance Committee meeting last month. The third item is an ERP update. That is a big project that Finance and HR are working on together, so I thought it would be worthwhile to talk a little bit about that. The timeline is for Finance. We've started, and we're going to be working through this year. Our go live is January 6th of 2025. HR and payroll will start this September, and then they'll work all of next year, and their go live is January of 2026. Just to give you a little idea of the scope, the first thing we've started is our chart of accounts. As I mentioned, that's kind of the building blocks for accountants. There are 6,500 different accounts that we have to analyze and figure out how to change those accounts to fit the new configuration. And then our new buzzword is crosswalk, so we can convert those. So that's a big lift, and our team, Jamie is the project manager, and then we have some of our other key team working on that. What our calendar looks like for the next year, I just put it to paper. The training for this, just the in-session training, is 3 full days per week, 3 weeks per month till the end of the year. So we're doing that, and then we're doing our audit, our budget, our payroll, receipts and deposits and different checks. So that's all in addition to our regular work. And Jill's team will see the same thing next year. So it's a big lift, and I want to thank everybody and let you know how hard everybody's working. That's what I have for the standing items.
That's great. So we thought it would be real appropriate to start our 2025 discussion thinking about our largest impact to our operating budgets, and that is people. We remain a human capital enterprise, and with that comes the responsibility to really think about where we go in the future. We live in a really dynamic environment. This remains a dynamic environment, and one that is changing and shifting underneath our feet on a month-by-month basis. There probably isn't a week that goes by that this team in HR doesn't hear about a new recruiting challenge, a new retention challenge across the organization. Public safety, utilities, engineering, public works, you name it, and a lot of our departments are getting impacted by this dynamic environment. And so this is one that we felt as a first step with this new look quarterly finance committee meeting, there could be probably no more important topic than compensation and some of our changes in compensation. So Jill and her team have put together some good information on this and is going to provide an overview of our strategic approach on compensation.
Great. Thank you, Mike, and good morning. We are really excited in the HR team to be working even more collaboratively with the finance team and city admin, and of course all of you as well, as we look ahead and look at all aspects of compensation. So we want to start off by talking about just some of the challenges today. These aren't necessarily brand new challenges with recruiting and retention, but they certainly are more significant over the last handful of years. So with these recruiting and retention challenges that we are experiencing, it's even more important now than ever that we have a really strong comp philosophy and a strategy that supports that philosophy. And as you all know, budget considerations are always a major factor in how and when we can implement changes to our compensation system. Another significant challenge that I want to point out is that's just around the corner is the loss of our NDPERS defined benefit plan. So as of January 1st of 2025, any new hires after that time will not be eligible to participate in a defined benefit plan. And that has really been a strong retention tool for us over the years. So in the future, really 2/3 of our workforce will not be covered under a defined benefit plan. They'll be covered under a defined contribution plan similar to a 401k. And so, you know, those applicants who were attracted to us because of that defined benefit pension, that just has kind of leveled the playing field with private sector now that we're going to be shifting. So next I want to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that we're going to discuss today. First of all, adopting a compensation philosophy and strategy, I think, is a really important opportunity. We want to align the human capital or personnel budget with our overall compensation philosophy. We also think it's really important to develop a human capital strategic plan that we're calling Staffing for Success. And lastly, we really want to build in some agility in making compensation-related decisions. So we think the finance, admin, and HR committee that Mike had mentioned will really support the agility that's needed in our current state with our labor market. And Mike already covered this a little bit too, but you've seen this graphic before during the '24 budget process. And as you all know, over 75% of our general fund budget goes to cover compensation and benefits for our whole workforce. Currently, we have about 1,700 active employees on payroll right now. Of course, some of those employees are funded through enterprise funds as well. But it's important to keep in mind that, you know, whenever we make changes with our overall compensation structure, that there's really a significant impact to the general fund. All right. So next I want to talk a little bit about comp philosophy and strategy. Having a well-defined comp philosophy really helps to support recruiting and retention efforts. It's really just a formal statement that guides our decision-making related to employee comp and benefits. The comp strategy then is just the formal plan that describes our approach to all aspects of comp and benefits. So in other words, how we maintain that compensation philosophy throughout each year or period of time. So we're going to come back and talk more about comp philosophy and strategy, but first I want to talk about really two key components that drive compensation, and those are internal equity and external equity or market. So our internal equity really creates that consistency within our organization for pay. So like most medium to large organizations, we use a job evaluation tool that it's used to create really that internal hierarchy of positions based on the 8 key factors that you see in that first bullet point. So qualifications, decision-making, considers all elements of the environment and hazards. The job evaluation ultimately determines a classification for a particular position and determines which pay grade that position is assigned to and paid within. The second key component, though, is that external equity or our overall competitiveness in the labor market. And so where we use labor market comparisons to determine if our pay is competitive within the relevant labor market. And we look at relevant labor market is where are we drawing our most applicants and ultimately employees for those positions. What's that market area that we need to target to ensure that we are competitive? So for example, at the city administration level, we're going to be looking to that larger region and maybe even national data for market, as opposed to a position that we recruit more locally and where the majority of our applicants are local, we're going to rely more heavily on that local market to help determine competitive pay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So these two seem to fight each other sometimes in that I wonder if there's ever been any kind of attempt to try to identify how our internal equity kind of classification system matches with the competitive marketplace. I'm thinking, somebody that's in an administrative assistant position that's got a high level of decision-making perhaps, and how that compares to the competitive market. Because oftentimes then it will cause, it seems to me, a flattening of those salary schedules if you're looking too heavily at the external market. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think I understand what you're asking, and yeah, they are different components of comp, but they really both are important in looking at our overall comp. So
Maybe my question is, how do you balance the two of them?
Right. So when, we're going to talk in a couple of minutes about our market survey and how we look at market, but we're also going to talk about our salary structure. And so one of the tools that's used when we look at our overall salary structure, and again, we'll get into more detail here, but the salary structure can also kind of be tested against market as well. So we, most often though, when we're looking at the results of a market survey, we're looking at benchmark positions, and then we're making an adjustment to that individual position. So in your example, a couple years back here, we found that our office associate positions, the position itself really hadn't changed, but the local market where we're primarily recruiting from had changed. So at that point, we did a market adjustment and moved that whole series of positions up a grade or so to make sure that we aligned with market. And so we, again, we rely heavily on that internal equity piece until market tells us that we've got to be paying higher. And then that's when we're making those individual market adjustments. Sometimes the market will tell us that our whole salary structure needs to be looked at. And that too is, we're going to talk about in just a minute, because we really have reached that point where the whole structure really needs to be adjusted. Okay. All right, so I want to talk just a little bit about our overall comp strategy before we circle back to comp philosophy, so that you have more information on our current projects. Really our two key projects this year include a regional market survey and a salary structure update project. So these key projects, along with the proposed transition to that finance, admin, HR committee, are major components of our 24 comp philosophy. So we'll discuss the regional survey first. We have conducted a periodic regional market survey for over 20 years. The frequency has changed over the years, and our approach to the survey, changes over the years. 22. And we did make some market adjustments to individual positions at that time. Currently, we have about 340 total positions. And our last regional survey, we included 110 of those positions that we call, again, benchmark positions, to compare against the market in our region. With such a large survey, we're finding it just harder and harder to have other cities respond to this survey, maybe getting 50% participation because it was so lengthy. So we are looking at changing our strategy. And this is included in your packet as well, just a draft tentative schedule. But you can see we're planning on moving to a more phased approach to conducting market surveys. So phase 1 would be in 24, where we would survey public safety and we would look at health positions. Phase 2 in 25 would include our technical positions plus other positions that we've grouped there. So you can see the primary departments listed. Phase 3 in 2026 would include some of our administrative positions plus other departments and types of positions as well. So I want to emphasize that this doesn't mean that we only are going to look at market every 3 years for these positions. Each year, we also get invited to participate in surveys from other cities and counties and even states at times. And so we will be using that data as well as we have in the past to compare our positions with the appropriate market for, the positions that have been included in those surveys. Additionally, if we begin to see that we have recruiting or retention issues, we can do smaller surveys at that time too. And as you know, we've brought some of those forward to you in the past for approval. So just a little more detail about this
Could I
first.
just ask, could you back up one slide, please?
Sure.
So I am clear that, one more, please. I think I hear this correctly, but is the PEC no longer going to exist and it'll be replaced by this Finance Administration Human Resources Committee?
That is what we're proposing and would like for you to consider, yes.
And that will be a staff committee. It won't be like electeds?
That would be a staff committee, that's correct. And then we would roll that information up during the quarterly meetings, just like this meeting today.
I want to acknowledge that that's a good approach. I hope we can get there.
Great.
You know, years ago, Furnace kind of set up the PEC committee originally, John, and it was kind of try to get a combination of insiders and outsiders in it. We have two members that are not city employees or anything like that. But I think as we've gone along, what we've noticed that it's market study driven. The administrative team has to bring it to us. And we as commissioners then have the ability to weigh in if we don't like the manner in which they do it or what they do, but the facts should speak for themselves, because typically when Dave and I were looking at it, it was what's in the market, what's going on, or different subjective things. This way, it really puts it on HR, what's the market going on, and puts it on finance, what we can afford or do, and then it would come as a recommendation. We think it'll be quicker, because they'll be able to respond to the marker much quicker. Sometimes we're waiting for meetings. Ben Dow may have somebody who's going to walk on them and he needs a decision within 2 weeks or somebody's gone. So we think this matter would be more professional and be better service, so.
All right, so just a little bit more about 2024 and our market survey. Again, we'll be focusing on public safety. So 27 cities from 11 states have been invited to participate in the survey, and we will have those survey results sometime by the end of April. As far as health, we find that it's challenging to get good data through our regional survey. And so we're going to be exploring local and regional market data sources, including private sector, because that's, you know, typically where we are competing for our employees as well. And we'll certainly work with DESI and other leaders from Fargo Cass Public Health to make sure we're looking at the right data for those positions.
Bear with me, Jill. As you're doing these studies, I'm hoping we can also look for learning moments relative to diversifying our workforce and applicant pools. If you see any indications or opportunities to learn from what others, because it's a challenge everybody faces, is my sense of how do we reflect the communities we serve and how do we get there and get the applicant. So if you can, while you're going down those paths, look for moments that we could glean anything that would help us in those capacities, it'd be great, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Jill, can I ask you a question? When you say public safety, so that's police and fire, is there anything besides that?
Police and fire, and not just the sworn positions, but we do have some of the civilian positions as well.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So the 27 cities, you're talking about just public employees there? Or are you talking private sector as well?
No, this survey does focus just on cities within the region.
So the public sector.
The public sector, correct.
So for health, you're using private sector, but, okay. Well, yeah, I mean, police and, that makes sense. Police and fire would just be public sector. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so next we want to talk a little bit about the salary structure update. And again, this was kind of the second key component of our 24 comp strategy. We first engaged our comp consultants, MRA, to review our overall pay structure late 2019, early 2020. And due to the pandemic and following budget constraints, we really kind of put that project on hold until early last year, so early 23, we had re-engaged MRA to work with us again on reviewing all aspects of our overall salary structure. And we specifically asked them to look at the pay structure at our range spreads. able to see that we have a much narrower range spread, and I'll describe what I'm talking about a little bit more in just a minute. But through our market surveys and looking at that market data, again, it became really obvious that our range spreads were much narrower than those throughout the region, and even looking at some private sector data. So a little bit about our salary structure to help understand what I'm talking about when I say range spread. So this is a screenshot of our current pay structure. We currently have 27 pay grades, and each of those have 11 steps. The exception to this is our police and fire pay grades. Those grades align with our current structure, but the range spreads for those grades are around 45 to 50%. Additionally, they move through their pay grades at a more accelerated pace than the other employees throughout the city. And when we implemented their new pay plan in 2019, again, this is where we really started to recognize the gap between our range spread and range spreads, not only for public safety, but for other positions as well. And so with our current structure, where our non-public safety employees might have a 2 or 3% increase when they move from step 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, our public safety positions actually receive more like a 5 or 6% increase as they're moving through some of the steps of the range. So a little more accelerated growth through that structure. And so you can see we have step 3 highlighted for comparison. I'm going to come back to step 3 in a little bit. But at the bottom of the slide, too, you can see how that range spread is determined. We're really comparing the max to the min, and currently that's a 30% spread. So this next slide is just an example of what a future pay range might look like as we work through options with our consultants. This, as you can see, has a wider range spread, 44% spread rather than the 30%. And this one has 15 steps rather than our current 11 steps. So if we were to adopt a plan like this, we would move the entire salary structure from current up by whatever percentage is determined, and would increase the number of steps available for growth for compensation for our employees as well. So it would be a similar approach that we use when we adjust the pay structure for a cost of living adjustment. And you can see, again, this is just an example, but in the example, our current grade 12, step 3 is $30.87. In the example proposed step, that step might bump to something like $31.62. And so that's just to show how each step within the pay structure ultimately would be adjusted.
Joe, what's the frequency in which you get your steps? So if I start here today, step 1, when will I get my next step?
So currently that is a 1-year increment for non-public, well, for all positions. So
is this over 15 years? This is what we should get?
in this example, as it's laid out, yes, this would be through 15 years. So it would really take you 14 years to get to that top step. We have looked at options of longevity steps as well at the top part of the range, where it might take a little bit longer. You might stay at a particular step for, say, 2 years rather than 1 year. But these are all options that are being explored with our consultants right now.
I might have missed this, but what is the percentage change in this particular example?
Yeah, so this example was a 4.5% increase from our 2023 ranges. So with the COLA, it would be about a 2.5% adjustment to our 24 ranges.
And how, I apologize, how does that compare then to the public safety step increases?
And so our current steps are about 2 to 3% for non-public safety. For public safety positions, they're typically in that 5 to 6%. We're still working with the consultants to determine what our future structure might look like. As you know, we've had some recent changes within our labor market, within the state and within the region. And so we really kind of asked them to go back to the drawing board and consider additional options for our overall salary structure.
Okay.
So that if and when we would implement, we ensure that we're competitive, because a lot changed from early '23 to the end of 2023.
So here's an example again of internal versus external, and having the equity across the internal system seems like it would be important. If we're doing that for public safety, we should be doing it for everybody, it seems.
Yes, and so just to clarify, this salary structure update is for everybody. So all 27 grades and the public safety grades, again, if
Okay.
this is approved,
It
would
be
increase.
included. Okay.
Similar to what we do with a COLA now, where they're all adjusted
Okay.
at the same time. But then the public safety market will just help inform, if we adopt a new salary structure, are we competitive with that market?
Gotcha.
Okay.
Jill, I'm just curious with this approach and our approach, and then you have the county and their approach, and then you have the school district and their approach. And do these steps and lanes and formats even reflect each other? Like, is the school systems recognizable to us? Is the counties, are we recognizable? I mean, I'm just wondering how much similarity, because I don't know there is or not.
Yeah, the counties would probably be more recognizable to us. A step and grade system or structure like we have is really common within public sector, but there are cities throughout our region that have a pay for performance, so it's a system in place. So it's really more of a salary range that they're working with. And then other cities have collective bargaining agreements with their unions. So rather than a step and grade system like ours, they might have negotiated a 5-year plan for salary and benefits that just, covered that period of time. So it is difficult when you're trying to compare. There is no exact apples to apple comparison when we're looking at compensation. So we typically are really focused initially on base pay, and then we look at what are some of those additional pays, shift differentials, the different kind of ad pays or premium pays and how are we being competitive with those types of pay, as well as benefits. So, you first look at base pay and then you consider total compensation. Any other questions on that? No? Okay.
Part of it is it's Greek to people like me to understand these languages that you live in daily.
Sure.
And the better we can is just have layman's understandings of it. And in the public's minds, someone who works for the school district or works for the parks or works, they work for the public. And the more we can have a common ground and similar language, I would think maybe hopefully the better.
Sure. Okay, so just a little bit more about the salary structure update. We're going to be working with our comp consultants. We will likely need to make changes from that very preliminary report that we got last year because of those changes within our state and our regional market. And so we should have the recommendations by the end of April on our salary structure as well. And so again, and Commissioner Preston, you'd posed this question, but with pay and benefits making up 75% of our general fund budget, whenever we do a structure change, whether it's a COLA or Any other type of change like adopting a new structure, it really comes at a significant cost. And so right now, when we have implemented, for example, the COLA this year, the cost to the general fund was, for a 1% COLA is about $730,000. When we look at the whole enterprise and general, it ends up being about $1 million to implement a 1% increase. So, at that rate, as we look at implementing a new pay plan, it likely will be a large dollar amount that we will be coming back to propose that adjustment to the overall salary structure.
Can I ask a question about a more general finance kind of issue? You talked originally, way up front, about the pension plan going from defined benefit to defined contribution. And as I understand from the state level, there's a huge dollar figure in making that transition because you're having to fund both sides. Do we have any kind of obligation in that, or is that totally the state?
So we know that the employer contribution went up by 1% this year. And once it closes, I suppose there could be future legislation that might form a funding plan that could involve the political subdivisions as well.
Okay.
But at least initially, that additional 1% employer contribution was put into place to help fund the current obligation.
So at this point, not yet, but possibly.
And that's a great question, Commissioner Preston, really great question, because you will continue to have the actuaries that will continue to have to test the closed plan to make sure that it has revenue adequacy to be able to fund its obligations. And if you have life expectancies that continue to surpass historical pattern, if you have people drawing in those pension dollars for longer periods of time, they will continue to have that actuarial analysis to suggest that there may need to be more contribution increases on the employee and employer sides in the future. There will be a legislative topic that we'll continue to monitor in addition to the defined contribution plan now that will be starting up. We'll continue to be in that space, even though as a political sub, we can enroll a new person to it, we'll continue to be in that space, having to manage our people as well as our retirees.
Okay, so next I want to just again touch briefly on the potential transition to the Finance Admin HR Committee or FAR Committee. Our goal is really to create just a well-defined, consistent plan for all comp decisions and really simplify and streamline the processes involved. And part of this goal too would empower, again, Finance Admin HR to make decisions that are guided by the comp philosophy and the overall financial strategic plan that we are hoping you all will consider adopting in the near future. And this committee would just support that agility that's needed to recruit and retain, make those decisions more quickly, and some of those decisions shifting to the department head as well at the time of offer, and we'll touch on that in just a minute.
Jill, if I might, when you talk comp philosophy, and if we were asked to define our philosophy, are we in the culture that we look for longevity and we invest in longevity and we want institutional continuation of our skill sets of our people? Or are we of the mindset that we can replace those senior folks with much less expensive people at the beginning of the work? So because that teeter-totter, I see it both ways at times, where people embrace the idea that we can actually replace people with more affordable people. And then the other side is, we really invested in you, we need you to stay. Mm-hmm. How would you describe our comp philosophy in that context?
Yeah, we definitely recognize the longevity and want to continue to do that. In fact, if we're able to hang on to people who have retired and might consider other positions within the city who are ready to retire from their primary position, that's great, and we have several examples throughout the city. So we really do, try to support and retain those long-term employees. And of course, it's just inevitable that we're going to have newer people coming into the workforce who are going to join us too, and that too is a good thing, that kind of diversity of thought and experiences. That's all, makes for a better workforce all around. But our comp philosophy, which we'll talk in more detail in just a few minutes, really is not only designed, will not, right, in our future philosophy, should not only be designed to support recruiting, but to support retention. Yes. Okay. So this full document is in your packet, but this is just a screenshot that shows you, again, how we want to be able to make more consistent decisions that are really well structured, so everyone involved in the process understands what the levels of approval are that are required for the different types of changes. So just for example, currently when we have a new hire, our department heads are able to hire up through step 3. Anything beyond that step 3 goes to the position evaluation committee. And that can take about 24 hours maybe from the time that we get the request and then get it sent out and get responses from a majority of that committee. So this is just an example where we'd like to shift more of that decision-making to the department head. Looking at steps 1 through 5, it's getting increasingly difficult to bring someone on in those steps 1 through 3, so just giving them a little more room to work with. But then starting rates of pay beyond that, just to support and ensure internal equity, we would do a brief review in HR and would run that decision by city admin as well. So again, just some examples of what we are proposing for future decision-making. And both this document and there's a more detailed document that's in your packet, both are really intended to supplement our overall compensation policy, and we'll be bringing that forward to you in the coming months. But these documents are, again, just intended to supplement that overall policy.
Can you explain what was it, suppression? Step increase suppression and?
Yes, so occasionally we'll have someone on a probationary status, so within their first year, and it might be that there's a certain type of certification that they needed to obtain within that 1 year. And so if they have not, typically we would extend their probationary, suppress their increase just until they obtain that certification in that example, and then they're paid retroactively to their anniversary date.
Can I ask a question? So then you're eliminating position evaluation committee? Is that what we're doing?
Yes, if this is adopted, we would shift to this more staff-focused committee.
So the staff will be determining all this, and then the elected officials and our committee will no longer be involved? That's very concerning to me.
Yeah, and the idea is that not all decisions stop at the HR or even city admin level or the committee level. We would still be bringing some of those requests to you. If they needed to come to you in a more timely manner, we would bring them to you during a regular commission meeting. If it was something that could take a little more time to respond on, we would bring them to you during this quarterly meeting. So it isn't intended to eliminate decision-making where it needs to rest, but with the comp philosophy, that would help to guide some of those decisions that could be made more on an ongoing day-to-day basis without, necessarily convening a full committee. So that's what's being proposed, and we're asking you to consider, but certainly want to know your thoughts on that.
What Jill shows on here is just a snippet of this two-page document, and she has it kind of bucketed by, you know, an entire pay structure adjustment, or if there's position adjustments. This one is individual employees that you kind of need that agility if you're dealing with a one-off situation. And so, you know, for example, the green, the pay structure adjustments, that has a significant, it's going to have a significant cost involved, and that stretches all the way out to budget committee and commission. So basically, it's just looking at how specific the financial impact would be in deciding who can make those approvals. This is just obviously offered as a suggestion.
Can I just make a real quick comment? To me, this is unacceptable. What we have now, what you're proposing is city employees determining compensation for city employees, and then no one else is being involved in that. And that's not a recipe for success. Thank you.
Can I add? I appreciate this approach, changing to adding more agility to the department level. I know in recent hires, even in my portfolios, that we have some positions where it's a matter of keeping them in the system and being able to act before it can go to PUC. The other thing I appreciate is it does ultimately come to all 5 of us in this new approach through these quarterly meetings and ultimately through the approval of the budget. Before, it really just stopped with 2 commissioners, and we were not part of the decisions as a full city commission other than the budgeting process. So I appreciate this change.
And if I could just add to that, it just seems like this proposal is really trying to move the decision-making closer to the individuals that truly should be accountable for them. So, you know, in my portfolio as well, there's been cases where there has been a position offered and that had to be delayed because of this process. So, and if I remember correctly, I think that particular candidate moved on to another job offer. So the more agile, the more flexible we can make this, we still hold the department heads accountable for the decisions they're making. So I'm glad to see this.
I think it ties administrative. It's not really employees like making the comp issues. It's the administrative team is making the comp issues, recommending to the commission, and then all 5 commissioners get to weigh in. So it's not just 2 of us on that meeting. So to me, it's professionals looking at what the market is, what's going on in the market, and we can react quicker. I think what we've been sometimes is a little slow reacting, and we lose people. And John, you just talked about it. We want to retain our people. So Furnace did at one time a different direction. Now we're trying to do it a little bit more professional, eyes on it, and to do it. Not to say we didn't get that before. We had that, but now you basically have to marry finance to salary. So we don't have this, whoops, we suddenly change salary at HR, and then Susan has to say, we can't afford it or can't do it. And again, it still comes to the commission. The commission will have to decide any of these decisions that go forth, but it'll make us be able to do it professional and react faster as far as I understand. The fireman's concerned, you would be taking that on, knowing what's going on, and then moving forward quicker, fast.
Yeah, that's right, because the new committee structure would be a bi-weekly meeting schedule. So, you know, there are going to be certain changes that we would react to right away with, hopefully within that same workday, like starting rates of pay and, but other maybe it's a reclassification of a vacant position within a couple weeks of that vacancy occurring. If someone is doing a full reorganization or restructure, we can react much more quickly that way.
And I was just going to add, if I may, that this isn't a 2% unemployment market, too. We have to be able to act more quickly.
It's worth noting also that, and Commissioner Pepcorn, your comments are not falling on deaf ears. Part of our reality is that we also have to address and get to address our open meeting issues. And we all know that we've evolved and redirected the Finance Committee recently to be more apparent compliance with open meeting requirements. And I'm not saying we were or weren't always, but there's that issue, you know, of notification to the public notice, how many people making a quorum or not. This addresses that concern in my head in a good way. because we're not putting people into a position where you have two electeds in a meeting and somebody else can't walk in and turn it into an illegal meeting because it wasn't noticed. So that's clear. I'm sensing that cleanup in the Finance Committee, the evolution of the Finance Committee, the evolution of these processes, bringing things intentionally more back to the administration and staff, it makes more sense, and it's also more legally viable.
Okay, so next I just want to touch on sustainability. We've talked a lot about that as a group, that we really think that these changes that we're proposing and the overall strategy provide an approach to comp that's aligned with our human capital budget. And so, for example, each year we have our annual comp review, and then we have our budget process. And they've been a little bit separated, usually by a couple of months, and separate processes. We want to align those processes to make it easier for the department heads who are submitting the request, but then ultimately for all of you looking at the budget and determining, you know, where you're going to be committing those human capital budget dollars to, based on recommendations. And then we touched just earlier too, but the idea of staffing for success, again, we think it's going to be much more sustainable as we work towards a more strategic approach to find where we have gaps in staffing and how we can develop a plan to reach those necessary staffing levels where we do identify gaps.
And just for the commissioners to understand, oftentimes when we're doing the budget, this was not hitched to us to do that. We oftentimes would get some of the HR data late, and then we're already doing our budget, we've already done it. So this is to try to get us ahead of that, so all the commissioners know where we're at. Shay might recommend 3% of something or something, and we have a way of embedding that in the budget so we know that's true. Or if we can't afford it, the commissioners can deal with it. But it mirrors up more of a productive, I would say, budget, because we will have, quote, the salary changes that are recommended and the salary impact for Susan to wrestle with and say, yeah, we can afford it, or no, we can't afford it, and make those changes. I think it will help us much more in the budget to get the budget right.
So back to compensation philosophy here. Again, we talked about this at the very beginning, but it's really just that statement that guides decision-making related to employee comp. And it really helps to determine if, as an employer, if the city of Fargo intends to be a market leader, in other words, leading that market for that particular position, be market average or matching, or in some instances, organizations do choose to lag the market, but make up for that in other, premium pays and additional benefits to attract and retain. And so this is just a current draft of potential compensation philosophy. Over the last many years, we really have been at that market average, wanting to remain competitive, ideally leading the state market, but not necessarily leading that more regional market that we survey. And so this is just a question that we want to pose to all of you today to really think about what that future comp philosophy might look like. And that is really what's going to guide decision, day-to-day decision-making then on all things comp. And especially as we do those periodic market reviews, it's really going to help guide those decisions on what we are recommending for potential market adjustments. So again, this is just a current draft. You have in your folder a couple of sample, pretty extensive compensation philosophies from a couple of other cities. We certainly can provide even more examples, but this just gives a starting point. So next steps, our goal would be for the commission to consider adopting a comp philosophy during a future meeting. And again, that philosophy will help guide all of our strategy for comp and the overall budget process. As Susan mentioned earlier, I think we intend to meet again sometime potentially in May for that next quarterly meeting. At that time, we're going to have a lot more information from our market survey and our overall salary structure update. And that is all the information I have for you. Are there any questions or anything that anyone from the group would add?
Can I ask Jill, so do you track metrics at all to figure out whether we are falling behind in being able to fill vacancies, and how long those vacancies are open, how difficult it is to fill them, or is it more anecdotal?
Yeah, so we do have, with our application system, NeoGov, we do have that capability to run reports to give us some of those metrics. We intend to use those metrics even more in the future, but we do, for example, we recently ran reports just to try to understand for police and fire primarily where our applicants are coming from. And so we know that over 50% are coming from North Dakota market, some from Minnesota, we have some from other other cities as well. But primarily for those positions, we know North Dakota and Minnesota have been kind of that primary target. And so we do have some of that capability with our new ERP system as well. That's going to just enhance our ability to look at all metrics too. So we're excited about that.
That's good.
And I would just add too, in closing on the compensation topic, if there are other questions the commissioners have as we get underway with the 2025 budget process, we certainly want to be responsive to any questions, inputs, ideas that you might have. We just felt, and I mentioned this earlier, that this is such a cornerstone pillar of the budget that you really have to start with compensation and this philosophical statement first before you get into the other aspects of it, because it's so critical and key to everything else that we do throughout these departments. And I just really want to acknowledge and support our HR team too with their kind of new look philosophy and approach on trying to do this kind of rolling continued comparative analysis, if you will, of these other regional entities. I think this will be a good thing. I think it'll help us be more nimble, help us have better data that's more responsive. And so we're never done in this work. We never put it on the shelf and be done with it for 5 years. We're always going to be in this. But I really like this new organization, this new approach. But if there's other inputs and ideas that the commission has, we certainly want to include those as well. So thank you for your time today. It's much appreciated.
So Susan, you looked at the previous system that we did have, and you and Jill are confident that this is a better way of doing it? Because I know PUPEC, our PEC committee for a long time, we weren't even meeting. So my curiosity is this more timely for employee retention?
I believe it's more timely for those individual decisions that matrix has delegated down to the departments, but the overall kind of structural changes are still going to need to coincide with the budget process. They need to be part of the commission discussion and vote, as has been noted on that checklist.
Because I know I talked to Grand Forks and they felt they were caught flat-footed because they don't have the ranges you're talking about, and they maybe had money up front that they gave people, but they weren't long-term, they weren't advancing where they should be. And then they were having a hard time retaining when they got out 8-10 years. So you're really addressing this with all of the comp study. It's not just a COLA, but it's really a compensation study that shall help answer some of those questions of what we need to stay competitive in the market. I think what the commissioners have to weigh in is your last statement of what the purpose is where we want our employees, ahead of market, average, or below market, and where we feel the city of Fargo should be. But to me, what's changed in the time I've been on the commission is we have far more sophisticated people that work for our organization and have really some talented areas that we have to have the coverage and the talent in those places. So in order to keep and retain them. And to John's point, if you lose a snowplow operator, it's hard to retrain somebody. I mean, I tried to do it for a day. It may take a few days to get you trained up. But it's amazing, like things we don't think about do take talent and thought and different things. And we're automating everything, and everything's becoming electronic now as well. So I think it's important that we stay very competitive in this market. So when people are out there running the city, it's the best we can have, so.
Something I'd like to add to that concept or that overall view. Employee morale is so important, and how our people feel about their work and their place and how they're appreciated and fitting in. And I'm assuming, but you can't assume things, but I'm assuming that we look very carefully for indicators of morale, and I'm guessing it's probably often connected to compensation and benefits. But that's just really a preeminent, like retention. That's a preeminent thing, is to have a happy workplace. People feel valued. And so I'm assuming that's in between the lines in all this, and would challenge us all to make sure when we see opportunities to really step that up every chance we can.
Just want to compliment everybody who worked on this excellent presentation. I think for the commissioners is very understandable and thoughtful is how you went through that. Gives us a better understanding of what you're looking into. And sometimes what we want to do is best practices, and I believe this is best practices. So thank you.